The champagne bubbles tickled my nose as I raised the crystal flute to my lips, the effervescence carrying notes of green apple and honeysuckle that should have tasted like celebration, but instead sat bitter on my tongue. The living room of our brownstone hummed with that peculiar energy that only comes when two families who barely tolerate each other are forced into proximity by obligation and tradition. My mother-in-law's perfume, something French and expensive that she wore like armor, cut through the warm scent of the prime rib cooling on the dining table. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked away the final minutes of what had been, without question, the worst year of my 32 years on this earth. I could feel Marcus's eyes on me from across the room where he stood near the fireplace, one elbow propped against the mantel in that casual pose he'd perfected during his years as a corporate attorney, the one that said he owned every space he occupied. The fire crackled and popped, sending shadows dancing across the crown molding, and I focused on the heat of it against my left side, trying to ground myself in something real, something I could feel beyond the numbness that had become my constant companion over the past 6 months. "Everyone, if I could have your attention," Marcus called out, and the room fell silent in that immediate way that happens when someone used to commanding boardrooms decides to speak. My father lowered his scotch glass, the ice cubes clinking against crystal. My sister Sarah stopped mid-conversation with Marcus's brother David, her hand frozen in an animated gesture. Even Marcus's mother, Constance, who never stopped talking, pressed her thin lips together and turned to face her son with that look of perpetual disappointment she'd perfected over her 65 years. The wool of my burgundy dress suddenly felt too tight across my shoulders, too constricting, and I could feel a bead of sweat forming at the base of my spine despite the December chill that seeped through the old windows. The hem of the dress brushed against my knees, and I resisted the urge to tug at it, to do anything with my hands other than grip this champagne flute like it was the only thing tethering me to this moment. "I'd like to propose a toast," Marcus continued, and something in his voice made my stomach clench. It was that tone, the one he used right before delivering devastating news to opposing counsel, smooth as aged whiskey but with an edge that could cut glass. He raised his own glass, the champagne catching the firelight and throwing golden reflections across his face. He'd always been handsome in that patrician way, all sharp cheekbones and distinguished gray at his temples, but lately there was something cold behind his hazel eyes, something that made him look like a stranger wearing my husband's face. My heart started to pound, a steady drumbeat against my ribcage that I was certain everyone in the room could hear. The oriental rug beneath my feet seemed to shift, and I locked my knees to keep steady. "May I manage to get a less useless woman next year?" Marcus said, his voice dripping with contempt that coated the room like oil slicking across water. The words hit me like a physical blow, and for a moment the room seemed to tilt, the expensive artwork on the walls swimming in my peripheral vision. I heard my mother gasp, a sharp intake of breath that cut through the terrible silence that followed. My father's glass hit the side table with a thud that seemed too loud, and Sarah made a small noise in the back of her throat, something between a whimper and a growl, but I couldn't look at any of them. I could only watch as Marcus reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a manila envelope, the paper making a soft rustling sound that seemed deafening in the quiet. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, his Italian leather shoes silent on the rug, and threw the envelope at me with such casual cruelty that it hit my chest before falling to the floor at my feet. "Sign it already," he said, standing so close now that I could smell his cologne, the same Tom Ford scent I'd given him for our 5th anniversary, back when I still believed in us. "I've got several candidates waiting in line." The envelope lay there on the Persian rug, innocuous as a sleeping snake. Divorce papers. He'd actually brought divorce papers to our New Year's Eve party, to this gathering he'd insisted we host, with both our families present. The humiliation should have been crushing, should have driven me to my knees. Instead, I felt my lips curve upward. The smile started small, just a twitch at the corner of my mouth, but it grew, spreading across my face like sunrise breaking over a dark horizon. I could feel it, this strange, buoyant sensation rising in my chest, pushing out the heaviness that had lived there for so long. Because Marcus, for all his legal brilliance, for all his careful planning and strategic thinking, had made one crucial, catastrophic mistake. He had no idea that the situation was completely in my favor. "Something funny, Claire?" Marcus snapped, his face flushing that particular shade of red that crept up from his collar when he was losing control. His jaw clenched, and I could see the muscle there jumping beneath his skin. I bent down, my fingers steady as I picked up the envelope, feeling the weight of the papers inside, the official heft of legal documents that were supposed to signify the end of my marriage. The paper was smooth and cool against my fingertips, and I held it loosely, casually, like it was nothing more important than a grocery list. "Actually, yes," I said, and my voice came out stronger than I'd expected, clear and bright in the tension-thick air. "I find this extremely funny." "Have you lost your mind?" Constance interjected, her voice sharp as a letter opener. She stepped forward, her champagne silk blouse rustling with the movement, diamonds glittering at her throat like chips of ice. "How dare you smile at a time like this? My son is divorcing you, you ungrateful little—" "Constance," said a voice from the corner of the room, quiet, but carrying absolute authority. "I think you'd better let Claire finish." Everyone turned, and I watched Marcus's face drain of color as he finally noticed who had been sitting in the wingback chair near the bookshelf for the past 20 minutes, nursing a bourbon and saying very little. Jonathan Pierce stood up, unfolding his considerable height with the easy grace of someone who'd spent his 60 years knowing exactly who he was and what he was worth. His silver hair caught the firelight, and his navy suit was understated in the way that only truly expensive clothing could be. He set his glass down on the side table with a soft click that somehow commanded more attention than if he'd shouted. Marcus's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. I could practically see the wheels turning in his head, watching him try to figure out why Jonathan Pierce, senior partner at Pierce, Mitchell & Stone, one of the most prestigious law firms in Manhattan, was standing in our living room on New Year's Eve. "Mr. Pierce," Marcus finally managed, his voice cracking slightly on the second word. "I didn't realize you were still here. I thought you'd left with the Hendersons." "No," Jonathan said mildly, moving to stand next to me, and I could smell his cologne too, something with cedar and leather, solid and dependable. "I stayed specifically for this moment. Claire asked me to." The confusion on Marcus's face would have been comical if everything hadn't been so deadly serious. I could see him trying to puzzle it out, trying to figure out the connection. Jonathan Pierce had been at the party because he was friends with my father from their Yale days, or at least that's what Marcus thought. What Marcus didn't know, what I'd kept carefully hidden for the past 3 months, was that Jonathan Pierce was also my attorney. "I don't understand," Marcus said, and now there was something desperate creeping into his voice, a note I'd never heard before. The hand holding his champagne glass trembled slightly, and liquid sloshed over the rim, spattering onto his polished shoes. "No, you don't," I agreed, and set the envelope down on the coffee table, smoothing my hand over it once before looking up at my husband, soon-to-be ex-husband. "You've been so busy with your candidates that you haven't been paying attention to what I've been doing." Sarah moved closer, and I could feel her presence at my shoulder, solid and supportive. My sister had always been the fierce one, the one who spoke her mind and took no prisoners. She was wearing her favorite black dress, the one that made her look like a warrior, and right now her dark eyes were fixed on Marcus with an expression that could have melted steel. "Claire, what's going on?" my mother asked, her voice tight with worry. She'd moved to stand next to my father, her small hand clutched in his larger one. They stood united, the way they always had, and I felt a pang of something that might have been envy. That's what I'd wanted with Marcus, that partnership, that unwavering support. "What's going on?" I said, turning to address the room, to address my family in his. "Is that Marcus has been so eager to humiliate me, so eager to show everyone what a failure I am, that he forgot to do his homework." I picked up the envelope again and opened it, sliding out the papers with deliberate slowness. The sound of paper against paper whispered through the room, and I could feel everyone leaning in, waiting. The documents were standard divorce papers, boilerplate language about irreconcilable differences and division of assets. Marcus had filed on grounds of emotional distance, citing my supposed inability to fulfill my duties as a wife, whatever that meant. "These papers," I continued, flipping through them, "are actually quite interesting. You're asking for an even split of all marital assets, which includes this brownstone we're standing in, the beach house in the Hamptons, your investment portfolio, and your partnership stake in Hamilton and Associates." "That's right," Marcus said, some of his confidence returning now that we were on familiar ground, talking about assets and numbers. This was his territory, the world of contracts and negotiations. "And you'll agree to it, because if you fight me, I'll drag this out for years. I'll make sure every cent you have goes to legal fees." "That might be effective," Jonathan said, his voice still mild, still conversational. "If your wife didn't have considerably better legal representation than you've anticipated." The color that had returned to Marcus's face drained away again. "What are you talking about?" I'm talking about the fact that I've been representing Claire for the past 3 months, Jonathan said. Since she first came to my office in September with some very interesting information about your activities. I watched Marcus's Adam's apple bob as he swallowed hard. Behind him, his brother David had gone very still, and Constance was looking between her son and Jonathan with growing alarm. "What information?" Marcus asked, but his voice had gone hollow. This was it. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, planning for, dreading and anticipating in equal measure. My hands were sweating now, and I wiped them on my dress, feeling the wool absorb the moisture. My heart hammered against my ribs like it was trying to escape, and I took a deep breath, pulling air deep into my lungs, holding it for a moment before releasing it slowly. "The information about your offshore accounts," I said quietly. "The ones in the Cayman Islands that you opened 2 years ago and have been funneling money into ever since." The room erupted. Constance's champagne glass shattered against the hardwood floor, crystal exploding in a spray of glass and golden liquid. David swore, a sharp profanity that cut through the chaos. My mother made a small, shocked sound, and my father's face went hard, his hand tightening around my mother's. But I kept my eyes on Marcus, watching as understanding finally dawned, as he realized just how badly he'd miscalculated. His face went through a series of transformations, shock giving way to anger, anger giving way to fear. I could see him thinking, calculating, trying to find a way out, but there wasn't one. I'd made sure of that. "That's ridiculous," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. He set his champagne glass down with a shaking hand, and it tipped over, more liquid soaking into the table's finish. "You're making things up. You're desperate." "Am I?" I asked, and reached into my clutch purse that I'd left on the side table. My fingers closed around the USB drive I'd been carrying for weeks, waiting for the right moment. It was warm from being near my body, and I held it up so everyone could see. "This contains copies of every transaction you've made to those accounts. Every wire transfer, every movement of funds. You've been hiding money from the IRS, Marcus. That's tax fraud. That's a federal crime." The grandfather clock chose that moment to begin its chiming, announcing the arrival of midnight, the arrival of the new year. The sound filled the room, deep and resonant, counting out the 12 strokes that marked the transition from one year to the next. Outside, I could hear fireworks beginning, the distant pop and crackle of celebrations happening all across the city, people kissing and cheering and welcoming in a year full of promise. "How did you—" Marcus started, then stopped, his jaw working soundlessly. He looked like a fish out of water, gasping and desperate. "How did I find out?" I finished for him. "That's the funny thing about being married to someone who thinks you're useless. They stop being careful around you. They leave their laptop open. They take phone calls in the next room and don't bother to lower their voices because they assume you're too stupid to understand what you're hearing." I moved closer to him now, and he actually took a step back, bumping into the mantel. The fire was dying down, the logs crumbling into embers that pulsed with orange heat. The room smelled like smoke and spilled champagne and expensive perfume, and the particular scent of fear, acrid and sharp. "You've been having an affair with Jennifer from your office," I continued, my voice steady despite the tears I could feel burning behind my eyes. I wouldn't cry. Not now. Not in front of him. "I've known about her since July. The hotel receipts were very informative, the text messages even more so. Jennifer Morrison, his paralegal, young and ambitious, and perfectly willing to sleep with a married partner if it meant advancing her career. She had long red hair and legs that went on for miles, and Marcus had apparently found her irresistible. I'd seen the photos they'd sent each other, the explicit messages, the declarations of love that had made me want to vomit. And then there was Natasha," I went on, ticking them off on my fingers. "The associate who joined the firm in August, and Michelle, the client whose case you were working on in September. Should I continue?" Constance made a strangled sound, and when I glanced at her, I saw that she'd gone pale. One hand pressed to her chest as if she could physically hold her heart in place. David was staring at his brother with something that looked like disgust. His mouth twisted into a grimace. "That's enough, Claire," my father said, and there was steel in his voice, but it wasn't directed at me. He was looking at Marcus with an expression I'd only seen a few times in my life, usually reserved for business rivals who'd crossed some unforgivable line. "I think my daughter has made her point." "Actually, Dad, I'm not quite finished," I said, turning back to Marcus. "Because here's the thing about those offshore accounts. You didn't just hide money from the IRS. You hid money from your firm. That signing bonus you got when you made partner, that performance bonus from the Whitmore case, All of it went into those accounts. Money that should have been reported, should have been taxed, should have been disclosed. Jonathan stepped forward, pulling his own set of documents from his inner jacket pocket. They rustled crisply as he unfolded them, and the sound seemed loud in the shocked silence. "We've been in contact with the IRS," he said calmly, "and with the Ethics Board of the New York State Bar Association. We have documentation of everything, the affairs, the hidden assets, the tax fraud, all of it." Marcus's legs seemed to give out, and he sank down onto the edge of the couch, his head in his hands. His shoulders shook, and I couldn't tell if he was crying or just trying to breathe. Part of me, the part that had loved him for 7 years, that had married him in a cathedral full of white roses and promises, felt a twinge of sympathy. But it was a small part, and it was drowned out by the fierce satisfaction that burned in my chest. "So here's what's going to happen," I said, my voice ringing clear through the room. "You're going to sign a different set of divorce papers, papers that Jonathan has prepared. Papers that give me this brownstone outright, that give me 70% of your investment portfolio, and that give me alimony payments for the next 10 years. You can't," Marcus tried, but Jonathan cut him off. "She can, and she will," Jonathan said. "Because if you fight her, Marcus, all of this becomes public. The affairs, the fraud, everything. You'll lose your partnership. You'll likely lose your law license, and you'll definitely face federal charges for the tax fraud. The IRS doesn't take kindly to attorneys who think they're above the law." The New Year fireworks were reaching their crescendo outside, a symphony of explosions that rattled the windows. The room was bathed in flashes of colored light, red and blue and green reflecting off the glass, off the champagne flutes, off the tears that were now streaming down Constance's face. "Your candidates," I said, and I let all the contempt I felt drip into that word, "are going to be very disappointed when they find out that you're broke, disbarred, and possibly facing prison time. Jennifer especially. I have it on good authority that she's already been asking around about other positions at other firms. Apparently loyalty isn't her strong suit." Marcus looked up at me then, and the expression on his face was something I'd never seen before. It wasn't anger or fear or even hatred. It was defeat, pure and complete. "How long have you been planning this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Since September," I admitted. "Since the day I found the receipt from the Mandarin Oriental for a room you'd booked when you told me you were working late. Since the day I finally accepted that the man I married was gone, replaced by someone I didn't even recognize." Sarah's hand found mine, her fingers lacing through mine, squeezing tight. The physical contact grounded me, reminded me that I wasn't alone, that I'd never been alone. My family had been there all along, waiting for me to ask for help, waiting for me to be ready to fight back. "I spent 3 months gathering evidence," I continued. 3 months meeting with Jonathan in secret, building our case, making sure everything was airtight. You made it easy, honestly. You were so arrogant, so certain that I was too weak to fight back, that you didn't even try to hide what you were doing. My mother was crying now too, but they were different tears from Constance's. My mother was crying with relief, with pride, and she mouthed, "I love you," across the room. I felt my own eyes burning, the tears I'd been holding back finally breaking free, tracking hot paths down my cheeks. "Every Thursday when you said you were playing squash with David," I said, looking at Marcus's brother, who had the grace to look ashamed, "you were actually at Jennifer's apartment. Every business trip to Chicago was really a weekend in Miami with Natasha. Every late night at the office was really drinks with Michelle. I have dates, times, photos, credit card statements, everything." The fire had died down to embers now, barely glowing in the hearth, and the room had grown colder. I could feel goosebumps rising on my arms, the thin material of my dress not enough to ward off the chill that seemed to emanate from more than just the weather. "The worst part," I said, and now my voice did crack, just a little, "is that I really loved you. I gave you everything. I supported you through law school, through the bar exam, through every late night, and missed anniversary, and broken promise. I defended you to my parents when they said you were too ambitious, too focused on your career. I believed in you." "Claire," Marcus tried, reaching out one hand toward me, but I stepped back, out of his reach. "No," I said firmly. "You don't get to say my name like that. You don't get to apologize or explain or try to make this better. You humiliated me tonight in front of our families. You called me useless. You threw divorce papers at me like I was garbage. So now you're going to face the consequences." Jonathan moved forward, laying his own set of papers on the coffee table next to the ones Marcus had brought. They were thicker, more substantial, bound with a blue backing that screamed official legal document. "You have until January 15th to sign these," he said to Marcus. "If you don't, we file everything with the appropriate authorities. We go public. We let the court of public opinion decide what to think about Marcus Hamilton, the attorney who stole from the IRS, cheated on his wife, and betrayed everyone who trusted him." Marcus's hands trembled as he picked up Jonathan's documents, the pages rattling like dried leaves in a winter wind. I watched his eyes scan the first page, then the second, and I could see the exact moment when the full weight of his situation crashed down on him. His face went from red to white to a sickly gray-green that reminded me of old meat, and for a second I thought he might actually vomit right there on our expensive rug. "This is extortion," he finally managed, his voice hoarse and desperate. He looked up at Jonathan, then at me, and there was something wild in his eyes now, something cornered and dangerous. "You're blackmailing me." "No," Jonathan said with the patience of someone explaining basic concepts to a slow child. "We're offering you a choice. You can sign these papers and salvage what's left of your career, or you can refuse and face the consequences of your actions. That's not blackmail. That's just reality." I moved to the window, needing to put some distance between myself and Marcus, needing to breathe air that wasn't thick with his cologne and his fear. The glass was cold against my forehead as I pressed my face to it, looking out at the street below where people were spilling out of buildings, laughing and shouting and embracing strangers, celebrating the promise of a new beginning. Confetti fell like snow in the streetlights, and someone had set off a fountain firework that shot silver sparks into the black sky. "Claire, please," Marcus said behind me, and something in his voice made me turn around. He was standing now, the documents clutched in both hands, and he looked smaller somehow, diminished. "We can work this out. We can go to counseling. I'll end things with the others. I'll fix this." The laugh that came out of me was sharp and bitter, tasting like copper on my tongue. "End things with the others?" I repeated. "That's your solution?" "Marcus, you don't get it. This isn't about the affairs. I mean, yes, the affairs are despicable, but that's not the point. The point is that you're a criminal. You committed tax fraud. You stole money. Those are federal crimes." "I was going to pay it back," he protested weakly. "I was just waiting for the right time, when the market—" "Stop," Sarah interrupted, her voice cutting through his excuses like a blade. She'd been quiet until now, standing beside me in silent support, but now she stepped forward and I could see the anger radiating off her in waves. My sister had always been protective of me, ever since we were kids, and she'd bloodied Tommy Richardson's nose for pulling my hair on the playground. "Just stop talking. Every word out of your mouth makes this worse." Constance had composed herself somewhat, dabbing at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief that she'd pulled from her purse. The fabric was pale pink silk, delicate and expensive, and it came away stained with mascara that looked like smudged bruises against the cloth. "This is your fault," she said, and it took me a moment to realize she was talking to me, not her son. "You drove him to this. If you'd been a better wife, if you'd given him children like you were supposed to, he wouldn't have needed to look elsewhere." The words should have hurt, should have cut deep into the place where I still kept all my insecurities and failures, but instead they just made me tired. I'd heard variations of this speech for years, ever since the second year of our marriage when we'd started trying for a baby and nothing happened. Month after month of negative pregnancy tests, of doctor's appointments, of invasive procedures and painful questions. It had taken me a long time to accept that maybe motherhood wasn't in the cards for me, and even longer to be okay with that. "Constance," my father said, and his voice had gone very quiet in that way that meant he was absolutely furious. He'd released my mother's hand and was walking toward Marcus's mother, each step deliberate and measured. "I've tolerated a lot from you over the years. Your passive-aggressive comments about my daughter, your implications that she wasn't good enough for your son, your constant criticism of everything from her career to her clothes to her choice not to join your country club." He stopped directly in front of her, and Constance had to tilt her head back to look up at him. My father wasn't a particularly tall man, maybe 5'10", but he had presence, the kind of quiet authority that came from building a successful business from nothing and navigating the shark-infested waters of commercial real estate for 30 years. "But if you ever," he continued, his words precise and controlled, "ever suggest that my daughter is responsible for your son's criminal behavior and moral failings, we are going to have a very serious problem. Do you understand me?" Constance's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Her handkerchief fluttered in her shaking hand, and she looked to her other son for support. But David had turned away, walking to the bar cart to pour himself what looked like a very large scotch. The crystal decanter clinked against the glass rim, and the amber liquid glug-glugged out in the heavy silence. "I think we should all take a breath," my mother said, ever the peacemaker. She'd moved to the couch and was picking up the larger shards of Constance's broken champagne glass with her bare hands, carefully placing them on a napkin. Her movements were methodical, practiced, and I recognized the coping mechanism. When things got too overwhelming, my mother cleaned. "This has been a very emotional evening for everyone." "Emotional doesn't even begin to cover it," I said, crossing back to the coffee table where both sets of divorce papers lay like opposing armies facing each other across a battlefield. I picked up Marcus's version again, feeling the weight of it, the presumption of it. He'd actually thought I would just sign these, would just roll over and accept whatever scraps he decided to throw my way. "Marcus, let me ask you something. When did you stop respecting me?" He looked up from Jonathan's papers, confusion flickering across his face. "What? When did you stop respecting me?" I repeated, enunciating each word clearly. "Was it gradual, or was there a specific moment when you looked at me and decided I was useless? When you decided I was just an obstacle between you and whatever life you really wanted?" The question seemed to throw him, and he set the papers down, running his hands through his hair until it stood up in messy spikes. His wedding ring caught the light, a simple platinum band that matched mine, and I found myself staring at it, remembering the day he'd slipped it onto my finger and promised to love and cherish me for the rest of our lives. "Claire, I never—" he started, but I held up my hand. "Don't lie," I said. "Not now. We're past that. I just want to know. I need to understand when I lost you, so I can stop wondering if there was something I could have done differently." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and the only sounds in the room were the ticking of the grandfather clock, the hiss of the dying fire, and the distant sounds of celebration from the street below. David took a long drink of his scotch, the ice cubes clinking, and I could smell the peaty smoke of the whiskey from across the room. "I don't know," Marcus finally admitted, and there was something almost like honesty in his voice. "It wasn't one thing. It was 1,000 little things. The way you'd ask about my day and I'd see your eyes glaze over when I talked about work. The way you stopped dressing up when we went out. The way you seemed perfectly content to just exist without any ambition, without wanting more." Each word was a small cut, precise and deliberate, but I didn't flinch. I'd asked for the truth, and here it was, ugly and painful and real. "I wanted more," he continued, and now he was standing again, pacing in that agitated way he had when he was working through a problem. His shoes whispered against the rug, back and forth, back and forth. I wanted a wife who was my equal, who challenged me, who understood the pressure I was under at the firm. I wanted someone who cared about the same things I cared about. Success, status, building something that mattered. I cared about building a marriage, I said quietly. I cared about building a home. I thought that mattered too. "It does," Sarah interjected fiercely. "It matters more than any partnership or promotion or bank account. Claire gave up her job at the museum to support your career, Marcus. She moved to this neighborhood because you wanted to be closer to the firm. She spent every holiday with your family because you said it was important. She gave you everything, and you threw it back in her face." I'd forgotten about the museum job, about those early days when I'd spent my days surrounded by art and history, cataloging paintings and planning exhibitions. I'd loved that work, the quiet contemplation of it, the way a single painting could tell you so much about the person who created it and the time they lived in. But Marcus had asked me to quit when he made junior partner, said he needed me to be available for the social obligations that came with his position, the dinners and networking events and charity galas that were really just opportunities for attorneys to court potential clients. "And this is how you repay that sacrifice?" Sarah continued, her voice rising with each word. "By humiliating her? By calling her useless in front of everyone? By committing crimes and having affairs and acting like she's the problem?" "Sarah, that's enough," I said gently, putting my hand on her arm. I could feel the tension in her muscles, the way she was coiled and ready to spring. My sister had taken kickboxing classes for the past 3 years, and right now she looked like she wanted to practice some of those moves on Marcus's face. "I appreciate you defending me, but this isn't your fight." "Like hell it isn't," she shot back, but she took a step back, respecting my wishes even if she didn't agree with them. She grabbed a champagne flute from the sideboard and drained it in one long swallow, then refilled it from the bottle that was sitting in a bucket of what was now mostly melted ice. Water dripped onto the hardwood, leaving dark spots that would stain if someone didn't wipe them up soon. Jonathan had remained standing near the bookshelf, observing everything with the detached interest of someone watching a play unfold. His bourbon sat untouched on the side table, and I noticed for the first time how carefully he'd positioned himself, close enough to intervene if needed, but far enough away to avoid becoming part of the family drama. It was a skill, I realized, something he'd learned in his decades of practicing law. How to be present without being involved, how to observe without judging, how to wait for exactly the right moment to speak. That moment came now as Marcus turned to him, desperation bleeding through every pore. "Mr. Pierce, you're a reasonable man. You understand how complicated these situations can be. Surely we can come to some kind of arrangement that doesn't involve destroying my career." "I'm representing Claire's interests," Jonathan said simply. "Not yours. If you want to negotiate, I suggest you retain your own counsel. Though I have to warn you that most attorneys in Manhattan aren't going to want to touch this case once they understand what you've done." "Why not?" Marcus demanded. "I have money. I can pay." "You committed tax fraud," Jonathan interrupted. "You violated the public trust. You made a mockery of the oath you took when you became an attorney. Most of my colleagues, the ones with any integrity at least, aren't going to want their names associated with defending that kind of behavior. It's bad for business." The color had returned to Marcus's face, but now it was the red of anger rather than embarrassment. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, and I saw David move slightly closer, as if anticipating that he might need to physically restrain his brother. "This is insane," Marcus said, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "You can't do this to me. I won't let you." "How exactly are you going to stop her?" my father asked, and there was something almost amused in his voice. "Are you going to threaten her? Intimidate her? That would be very unwise, Marcus. I may not be a lawyer, but I have resources. And I promise you that if anything happens to my daughter, anything at all, I will make it my life's mission to ensure you spend the next decade in a federal prison." The threat hung in the air like smoke, and I could see Marcus processing it, weighing his options. My father didn't make idle threats. When he said something, he meant it, and everyone in the room knew it. "This isn't how divorce works," Marcus tried, pivoting to logic since emotion wasn't getting him anywhere. "You can't just dictate terms. There are laws, procedures. A judge has to approve any settlement." "You're absolutely right," Jonathan agreed. "And when this goes before a judge, we'll present our evidence. The offshore accounts, the hidden assets, the affairs conducted on company time using company resources, the tax fraud. And then we'll let the judge decide what's fair. How do you think that's going to go for you?" I could see the calculations happening behind Marcus's eyes, watching him try to find an angle, a way out, something he could use to turn this situation to his advantage. It was what made him a good attorney, this ability to see all the angles, to find the weakness in any argument. But there was no weakness here. I'd made sure of that. "The prenup," Marcus said suddenly, seizing on something. "We have a prenuptial agreement. It specifies exactly how assets are to be divided in the event of divorce." I'd been waiting for this. The prenup had been Constance's idea, insisted upon before the wedding with much hand-wringing about protecting the Hamilton family legacy, as if Marcus's family had been robber barons instead of merely successful professionals. I'd signed it without much thought at the time, too in love, and too eager to just get married to care about the details. "The prenup is void," Jonathan said calmly. "It contains a morality clause that specifically states that if either party engages in adultery or illegal activity, the agreement is nullified. I believe the language is quite clear. Would you like me to read it to you?" Marcus's mouth snapped shut, and I saw the exact moment when hope died in his eyes. He'd forgotten about the morality clause, or more likely he'd never bothered to read that section carefully, assuming it would never apply to him. The great Marcus Hamilton, caught by his own arrogance. "Furthermore," Jonathan continued, pulling out yet another document from his seemingly endless supply, "we have sworn affidavits from 3 of your affair partners confirming the nature of your relationships with them. Jennifer Morrison was particularly forthcoming once we explained that she could be called as a witness in the fraud case. She's very eager to cooperate with authorities if it means avoiding any potential charges of being an accessory." "Jennifer wouldn't," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. He knew as well as I did that Jennifer would absolutely throw him under the bus if it meant saving herself. Loyalty might not be her strong suit, but self-preservation certainly was. My mother had finished cleaning up the broken glass and had moved on to straightening the pillows on the couch, fluffing them with sharp, precise movements that betrayed her agitation. She was a small woman, barely 5'3", with silver hair she kept in a neat bob, and the kind of understated elegance that came from growing up with very little and learning to make everything count. She'd taught me that, how to move through the world with grace even when everything inside was chaos. "I think," she said now, setting down the last pillow with careful deliberation, "that we should give Marcus some time to process all of this. Maybe we should all go home, get some rest, and reconvene when everyone has had a chance to think clearly." It was a reasonable suggestion, the kind of practical wisdom my mother was known for, but I shook my head. "No," I said firmly. "We're not leaving until this is settled. Marcus needs to make a decision tonight." "Claire, be reasonable," Constance started, but I cut her off with a look. "I've been reasonable for 7 years," I said, and my voice was harder now, edged with steel I didn't know I possessed. "I was reasonable when Marcus started working late every night. I was reasonable when he forgot our anniversary. I was reasonable when he stopped touching me, stopped looking at me like I mattered. I'm done being reasonable." I walked back to the coffee table and picked up Jonathan's documents, the ones that would give me everything I deserved and leave Marcus with just enough to start over, if he was smart about it. The paper was cool and smooth under my fingers, and I could smell the faint scent of toner from the printer that had created these pages, this roadmap to my future. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, holding the documents out to Marcus. "You're going to take these papers into the study. You're going to read them carefully, and then you're going to sign them. Tonight. Right now. And if I refuse?" Marcus asked, but there was no fight left in his voice. He sounded exhausted, defeated, like a man who'd just run a marathon only to discover the finish line had moved. "Then I call the number I have saved in my phone," I said, pulling out my iPhone and holding it up so he could see the screen. "The one for Agent Patricia Morrison at the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. She's expecting to hear from me one way or another by tomorrow morning. Either I tell her that we've reached an amicable settlement and she doesn't need to pursue the case, or I tell her to move forward with the investigation." The name seemed to hit Marcus like a physical blow. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division didn't handle routine audits or minor tax disputes. They handled fraud, major financial crimes, the kind of cases that ended with handcuffs and perp walks and mug shots on the evening news. "You're bluffing," he said weakly. "You wouldn't really turn me in." I met his eyes, and I let him see everything I was feeling. The betrayal, the anger, the hurt that had calcified into something harder and colder over the past 3 months. "Try me," I said softly. "After everything you've done, after the way you've treated me, do you really think I wouldn't follow through?" The silence stretched out, taut as a wire, and I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Outside, another round of fireworks went off, and the room filled with flashing colored light that painted strange shadows on the walls. Marcus took the documents from my hand, his fingers brushing mine in a contact that felt like touching a stranger. There was no spark, no recognition, nothing but the cool, impersonal touch of skin on skin. He looked down at the papers, then up at me, and I saw a question forming in his eyes. "Did you ever love me?" he asked. "Or was this all just a game to you?" The question was so absurd, so completely backwards, that I almost laughed. "I loved you more than I've ever loved anyone," I said, and I let him hear the past tense, the finality of it. "I would have done anything for you." "I did do everything for you, but you threw that away the moment you decided I wasn't worth your respect." He nodded slowly, as if he'd expected that answer, and turned toward the study. His shoulders were slumped, and he walked like an old man, each step heavy and labored. David followed him, and I heard him say something to his brother in a low voice that I couldn't make out. The study door closed behind them with a soft click that seemed to echo through the room. As soon as they were gone, my knees started to shake. The adrenaline that had been keeping me upright, keeping me strong, suddenly drained away, and I sank down onto the couch before my legs could give out entirely. The cushions were soft and enveloping, and I curled into them, pulling my legs up and wrapping my arms around my knees. Sarah was beside me in an instant, her arm around my shoulders, and I leaned into her warmth. She smelled like her signature perfume, something with jasmine and vanilla, and underneath that the familiar scent that was just her, just my sister, who'd been there for every important moment of my life. "You were amazing," she whispered into my hair. "I'm so proud of you." My mother sat on my other side, her hand finding mine and holding it tight. Her skin was soft, worn smooth by years of work and worry, and her grip was surprisingly strong for such a small woman. "We're here," she said simply. "Whatever happens next, we're here." My father had gone to the window where I'd stood earlier, his hands clasped behind his back, looking out at the celebrating crowds. Jonathan had finally picked up his bourbon and was taking small, measured sips, his eyes distant and thoughtful. Constance had retreated to the far corner of the room, standing near the antique sideboard where we kept the good china, the Limoges set that had been a wedding gift from her, and that I'd always hated. She was gripping her purse with both hands, the leather creaking under the pressure of her fingers, and her face had settled into an expression of carefully maintained composure that didn't quite hide the devastation underneath. I almost felt sorry for her, this woman who'd built her entire identity around being the mother of a successful attorney, who'd spent years looking down on everyone who didn't meet her exacting standards, now forced to confront the reality that her golden boy was nothing more than a common criminal. "How long do you think he'll need?" Sarah asked, keeping her voice low even though the study door was closed, and Marcus couldn't possibly hear us. Her breath was warm against my ear, and I could feel the rapid beat of her heart where our bodies pressed together. "Not long," Jonathan answered, setting his empty bourbon glass down with a decisive clink. "He's a smart man for all his faults. He knows he doesn't have any other options. The question isn't whether he'll sign, it's whether he'll try to negotiate for better terms." "Can he?" my mother asked, worry creeping into her voice. "Negotiate, I mean. Can he change the terms?" Jonathan shook his head, the movement slow and definitive. "Not substantially. We've already offered him more than he deserves. Any family court judge would give Claire considerably more than 70% once they saw the evidence of his fraud and infidelity. We're actually being quite generous." Generous. The word sat strange in my mouth when I tried it out silently. I didn't feel generous. I felt wrung out, exhausted, like I'd been running on pure adrenaline for so long that now that it was ebbing away, I could barely remember what it felt like to be normal, to be the person I'd been before I discovered the first hotel receipt tucked into Marcus's jacket pocket. That had been in July, a sticky, hot afternoon when I'd been getting his suits ready for the dry cleaner. The receipt had fallen out when I'd checked the pockets, a habit I'd developed after accidentally washing his AirPods one too many times. The Mandarin Oriental, room service charges for two, a bottle of Dom Perignon that cost more than our monthly grocery bill. The date on the receipt had been our anniversary, the day he'd told me he had to work late on an important brief. I'd stood there in our bedroom, the receipt clutched in my shaking hand, the air conditioning blasting Arctic air that raised goosebumps on my arms, but couldn't touch the cold that had settled deep in my chest. I'd known, in that moment, with the clarity of absolute certainty, known that my marriage was over, that the man I'd loved had been replaced by a stranger, that every working late and business trip and sorry I forgot had been lies built on more lies. But I hadn't confronted him. I'd carefully folded the receipt and put it in a shoebox in the back of my closet, the start of what would become my evidence collection. Then I'd researched divorce attorneys, reading reviews and credentials until my eyes burned, until I found Jonathan Pierce's name on a list of the top family law attorneys in Manhattan. Getting a consultation with him had taken 6 weeks, and I'd spent that time gathering more evidence, documenting everything, building my case with the methodical precision of someone who knew they'd only get one shot at this. "Claire?" My father's voice broke through my memories, gentle but insistent. He'd moved from the window and was crouching in front of me, his face level with mine. In the light from the table lamp, I could see every line and wrinkle, every mark that life had etched into his skin. He looked older than he had this morning, and I felt a pang of guilt for putting him through this, for making him spend his New Year's Eve watching his son-in-law's spectacular implosion. "I'm okay," I said, though we both knew it was a lie. I wasn't okay. I wouldn't be okay for a long time, but I would survive, and eventually, I would be better than okay. I would be free. "You don't have to be," he said, reading my thoughts the way he always had. "You're allowed to fall apart. That's what we're here for." Tears burned behind my eyes, hot and insistent, and I blinked them back furiously. "If I start crying now, I won't stop," I whispered. "And I need to hold it together until this is finished. I need him to see that he didn't break me." My father's eyes, the same dark brown as mine, were wet with his own unshed tears. "Sweetheart, you're the strongest person I know. You've always been the strong one, even when you were little. Do you remember when you fell off your bike and broke your arm?" I did remember. I'd been 8 years old, riding too fast down the hill near our old house, showing off for Sarah who'd just learned to ride without training wheels. The front tire had hit a rock and I'd gone flying, landing hard on the pavement with my arm twisted underneath me. The pain had been excruciating, a white-hot agony that had stolen my breath, but I hadn't cried. Not when the neighbors came running, not during the drive to the emergency room, not even when the doctor had set the bone. I'd only cried later, at home in my bed, with my mother stroking my hair and singing softly. "You didn't make a sound," my father continued, his hand covering mine. His palm was warm and calloused, the hands of a man who'd built his success through hard work rather than inherited wealth. "The doctor said he'd never seen a kid that tough. Your mother wanted to call a therapist, thought there was something wrong with you for not crying, but I understood. You were waiting until it was safe to fall apart." The study door opened before I could respond, and we all turned to look as David emerged, his face grim and unreadable. He closed the door carefully behind him and walked to the bar cart, pouring himself another generous measure of scotch without meeting anyone's eyes. The liquid glowed amber in the lamplight, and I could hear the ice cracking as it hit the warm whiskey. "Well?" Jonathan asked when David didn't immediately volunteer information. David took a long drink before answering, and I watched his throat work as he swallowed. "He's reading," he said finally. "Every word, every clause. He's looking for loopholes, for anything he can use. He won't find any," Jonathan said with quiet confidence. "I've been practicing law for 35 years. I wrote those documents myself, personally, and I had 2 of my best associates review them. They're airtight." "He knows," David said, and now he did look at me, his blue eyes so similar to Marcus's but somehow warmer, more human. "He knows he's fucked, pardon my language. He's just stalling, trying to delay the inevitable." Constance made a small, choked sound, and David's expression softened slightly as he looked at his mother. "Mom, I'm sorry, but you need to hear this. Marcus brought this on himself. He made his choices, and now he has to live with them. Claire isn't the villain here. She's taking everything," Constance protested, her voice thin and reedy. "She's destroying him. He destroyed himself," David countered, his voice firm but not unkind. "And honestly, she's being more merciful than she has any right to be. If it were me, if someone had done to me what Marcus did to Claire, I'd want blood. I'd want to see them ruined completely. Claire's giving him a chance to salvage something." The words hung in the air, stark and undeniable. David had always been the quieter brother, the one who stayed in the background while Marcus soaked up all the attention and praise. He was a corporate accountant, successful in his own right, but never as flashy, never as ambitious as his older brother. I'd always liked him, appreciated his steady presence at family gatherings, the way he'd actually listen when I spoke instead of just waiting for his turn to talk. "Thank you," I said quietly, and he nodded, understanding passing between us without need for more words. The clock struck 1 in the morning, the chimes sonorous and measured, marking the passage of time that felt both too fast and too slow. We'd been in this room for what felt like hours, but also like minutes, time stretching and compressing in that strange way it does during moments of crisis. Outside, the celebration sounds had died down somewhat, though I could still hear occasional laughter and the distant wail of sirens, the usual nighttime symphony of the city. My stomach growled, an embarrassingly loud sound in the quiet room, reminding me that I hadn't eaten since the hors d'oeuvres hours ago. The prime rib sat cold and forgotten on the dining table, along with all the sides I'd spent yesterday preparing. Roasted potatoes with rosemary, green beans with almonds, Yorkshire puddings that had probably deflated into sad, soggy discs by now. I'd planned this meal so carefully, chosen each dish with thought and care, imagining a festive evening full of warmth and family togetherness. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Anyone hungry?" Sarah asked, apparently having heard my stomach's protest. "I could go raid the kitchen, bring out some of that food that's going to waste." "I couldn't eat," my mother said, but even as she spoke, her own stomach betrayed her with a small rumble. She laughed, a sound that was half sob, and pressed her hand to her midsection. "Well, maybe just a little something." Sarah squeezed my shoulder once, then headed toward the dining room, her heels clicking on the hardwood. I heard her opening drawers in the kitchen, the clink of silverware, the soft thud of plates being stacked. Normal sounds, domestic sounds, jarring in their ordinariness against the backdrop of my marriage ending. She returned a few minutes later with a tray laden with food, none of it plated with any care, just piled on plates and grabbed from wherever it had been sitting. The prime rib had been hacked into rough slices, the potatoes dumped in a heap, the green beans scattered like pickup sticks. It should have looked unappetizing, but my mouth watered at the sight of it. "Eat," Sarah commanded, setting the tray on the coffee table and handing out plates with the efficiency of a field medic distributing rations. I don't care if you think you're not hungry. It's been hours, and none of us has eaten properly. You especially, she added, pointing a fork at me. You're going to need your strength. She was right, of course. My hands were shaking slightly, my head felt floaty and disconnected, and I recognized the signs of low blood sugar. I took the plate she offered and forced myself to take a bite of potato. It was cold and the rosemary had gone bitter, but I chewed and swallowed, then took another bite, and another, until I'd cleared half the plate without really tasting any of it. My father ate mechanically, his eyes distant, and I knew he was thinking about all the things he wanted to say to Marcus, all the ways he wanted to make him hurt for hurting me. My father had never been a violent man, had taught us that words were more powerful than fists, but I could see the desire for violence in the set of his jaw, the whiteness of his knuckles where he gripped his fork. Jonathan declined food but accepted another bourbon, and I noticed that his hands were perfectly steady as he poured. Not a tremor or shake despite the late hour and the stress of the situation. This was just another day at the office for him, I realized. Another family being torn apart, another life being restructured, another set of legal documents that would determine someone's future. He did this all the time, navigated these emotional minefields with the ease of long practice, and I felt a surge of gratitude that he was on my side. David had taken his plate and retreated to the window, eating while looking out at the street. Constance hadn't moved from her corner, hadn't accepted any food, just stood there like a statue carved from ice and disappointment. We were all waiting, suspended in this strange limbo between one life and the next, and the anticipation was a physical thing, heavy and oppressive. I could feel it pressing down on my shoulders, making it hard to breathe, and I set my plate aside, unable to force down another bite. "How much longer do you think?" my mother started to ask, but she was interrupted by the study door opening again. Marcus stood in the doorway, the documents clutched in one hand, and I couldn't read his expression. His tie was loosened and hanging at an angle, his hair was disheveled from running his hands through it, and there were deep shadows under his eyes that made him look haggard, older than his 35 years. For a moment, just a heartbeat, I saw the boy I'd fallen in love with in law school, the one who'd stayed up all night with me during finals, bringing me coffee and quiz cards, making me laugh when I was too stressed to think straight. But then he moved into the light, and the illusion shattered. This wasn't that boy anymore. That boy had been kind, had been ambitious but not cruel, had believed in justice and fairness and doing the right thing. This man had committed crimes, had betrayed every vow he'd ever made, had looked me in the eye and called me useless. "I need a pen," Marcus said, his voice flat and emotionless. Jonathan reached into his jacket and pulled out a fountain pen, an expensive Mont Blanc that probably cost more than most people spent on rent. He held it out, and Marcus took it with shaking hands, the gold catching the light as it changed possession. I stood up, my legs unsteady but holding, and walked to where Marcus stood. Up close, I could see the red rim around his eyes, the way his lips were pressed into a thin line, the muscle jumping in his jaw. He smelled like fear and expensive cologne, and the scotch he'd apparently been drinking in the study, and I had to resist the urge to step back, to put more distance between us. "You'll be okay," I found myself saying, and I was surprised to realize I meant it. I didn't want Marcus destroyed, didn't want him to lose everything. I just wanted him gone, wanted my life back, wanted the freedom to figure out who I was without him. "You're smart, talented. You'll land on your feet." "Will I?" he asked bitterly. "With tax fraud charges hanging over my head? With my reputation in tatters? You've made sure of that." "No," I corrected gently but firmly. "You made sure of that. Every choice that led to this moment was yours. I'm just refusing to go down with you." He flinched like I'd struck him, and maybe my words had hit harder than any physical blow could have. He looked at the papers in his hand, then at the pen, then back at me, and I saw something shift in his expression. Acceptance, maybe, or just exhaustion. The fight had gone out of him completely, leaving behind only resignation. "Where do I sign?" he asked Jonathan, who'd come to stand beside us. "Pages 5, 12, 18, and 23, Jonathan said, his voice taking on that crisp, professional tone that meant we were back in lawyer mode, back in the world of clauses and signatures, and legally binding agreements. "I'll need to witness each signature, and we'll need a second witness as well. David, would you mind?" David set his plate down and came over, his face carefully neutral. He took up a position on Marcus's other side, and together they bent over the coffee table where Jonathan had laid out the documents, pages arranged in neat rows like soldiers at attention. The pen scratched across paper, that distinctive sound of ink on high-quality stock, and with each signature, I felt something in my chest loosen, like a knot that had been pulled tight for months was finally starting to unravel. Marcus signed his name 4 times, each signature smaller and more cramped than the last, and Jonathan and David added their own names below his, making it official, making it real. "That's it," Jonathan said when the last signature was complete. He gathered up the pages with careful efficiency, tapping them against the table to align the edges before sliding them back into their folder. "I'll file these with the court first thing Monday morning. The judge should approve them within a few weeks, and then it's just a matter of waiting out the mandatory period before the divorce is final. 6 months. That's how long it would take in New York. 6 months from filing to finalization. Half a year of being technically married but actually separated, of living in limbo between one life and the next. But after 7 years of marriage, 6 months seemed like nothing. I could wait 6 months. I could wait forever if it meant being free." Marcus set the pen down on the table with a click that sounded like a door closing, final and irrevocable. He looked at me, and I saw 1,000 things in his eyes. Regret, anger, shame, sorrow, maybe even a ghost of the love we'd once shared. But mostly I saw defeat, and I hated that I'd been the one to put it there, even if he'd given me no choice. "I'll pack some things and stay at David's tonight," he said, his voice rough like he'd been shouting, though he hadn't raised his voice once during the entire evening. "I'll arrange to get the rest of my stuff next week." "Take whatever you want," I said, meaning it. The things in this house were just things, could be replaced or lived without. What I wanted couldn't be packed in boxes or divided in a settlement agreement. "I don't care about any of it." He nodded, then turned toward the stairs that led to our bedroom, our former bedroom. I'd have to start thinking of it as just my bedroom now, my space, my sanctuary. The thought was strange and liberating and terrifying all at once. "Marcus," I called after him, and he paused with one foot on the bottom step, his hand on the banister. "I really did love you. I want you to know that. Whatever else happens, whatever you think of me after tonight, I need you to know that what I felt for you was real." His shoulders hitched, and for a moment I thought he might cry, might finally show some genuine emotion beyond anger and self-pity, but he just nodded without turning around and continued up the stairs, his footsteps heavy on the carpeted treads. David followed him, probably to help him pack, or maybe just to make sure he actually left, and I heard their voices murmuring together, too low to make out words. Constance suddenly came to life, moving from her corner with swift, angry strides. She stopped in front of me, and I could smell her perfume more strongly now, that expensive French scent mixing with the sourness of sweat and stress. Her face was composed, but her eyes blazed with fury. "I hope you're satisfied," she hissed, keeping her voice low but lacing it with enough venom to kill. "You've gotten your revenge, ruined my son's life, destroyed our family. I hope it was worth it." I met Constance's gaze without flinching, feeling something settle inside me, something solid and unshakable. "Your son ruined his own life," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. "I just refused to let him ruin mine too." "You could have forgiven him," she spat, and tiny droplets of saliva hit my cheek, warm and disgusting. I resisted the urge to wipe them away, refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me recoil. Marriages go through rough patches. People make mistakes. You could have worked through this, gone to counseling, saved your family. But no, you had to be vindictive, had to destroy everything because your pride was hurt. The words should have cut, should have made me doubt myself, wonder if maybe she was right, if maybe I was being too harsh, too unforgiving. But they just slid off me like water off glass, powerless to touch the certainty that had crystallized in my chest over the past 3 months. "Constance?" my father said, his voice carrying a warning that made even her pause. He'd moved to stand beside me, his presence solid and protective, and I could feel the heat of his anger radiating off him in waves. "You need to leave. Now. Before I say something we'll both regret. This is my son's house," she protested, but her voice had lost some of its venom, replaced by something that sounded almost like desperation. "I have every right to be here." "Actually, you don't," Jonathan interjected smoothly, tapping the folder of signed documents. "As of approximately 5 minutes ago, this is Claire's house. Marcus signed over his interest in the property, which means Claire can ask you to leave And if you refuse, she can call the police and have you removed for trespassing." Constance's face went through a rapid series of transformations, shock giving way to outrage, giving way to something that looked almost like fear. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again, but no words came out. She looked like a fish drowning in air, gasping and desperate, and I felt that pang of pity again, stronger this time. "You don't have to leave," I heard myself saying, and Sarah made a small noise of protest beside me. "You can stay until Marcus is ready to go. You're still his mother. I understand that you love him, that you want to protect him. I'm not going to throw you out." "Claire," Sarah whispered urgently, her fingers digging into my arm, "you don't owe her anything. After everything she's said to you over the years, all the passive-aggressive comments and outright insults, you don't owe her a damn thing." "I know," I said, covering Sarah's hand with mine. "But I'm not doing this for her. I'm doing it for me. Because I don't want to be the kind of person who kicks someone when they're down, even if they deserve it." Constance stared at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable, and then something seemed to crumble inside her. Her shoulders sagged, her spine curved forward, and suddenly she looked every one of her 65 years, all the careful maintenance and expensive cosmetics unable to hide the weight of her disappointment and grief. "I don't understand you," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. The fight had drained out of her as quickly as it had appeared, leaving behind only exhaustion. "I've never understood you. You're nothing like I expected Marcus to marry." "No," I agreed. "I'm not. I don't come from money. I don't have the right connections or the right pedigree. I'm just a girl from Queens whose parents worked 3 jobs between them to send her to college. But I loved your son with everything I had, and that should have been enough." "Love," Constance said, and she made it sound like a dirty word. "Love doesn't pay the bills. Love doesn't secure your future. Love doesn't ensure your children have opportunities." "Maybe not," I said. "But love is supposed to mean something. It's supposed to count for something. And the fact that you don't think it does explains a lot about why Marcus turned out the way he did." The words hung in the air between us, stark and unforgiving, and I watched them land, watched Constance process them, watched her face flush with color and then drain white again. She looked like I'd slapped her, and maybe in a way I had. But I was done being careful with my words, done protecting everyone else's feelings while my own were trampled. Footsteps on the stairs announced Marcus and David's return, and we all turned to watch them descend. Marcus had changed into jeans and a sweatshirt, casual clothes that made him look younger, more vulnerable. He carried a leather duffel bag, probably packed with whatever he'd grabbed in a hurry, and his eyes were red-rimmed and swollen like he'd been crying. David followed close behind, carrying Marcus's laptop bag and a garment bag with what were probably several suits. The sight of Marcus in his casual clothes, looking so normal and everyday, hit me harder than I'd expected. This was the Marcus I'd woken up next to on lazy Sunday mornings, the one who'd make terrible puns while cooking breakfast and sing off-key in the shower. This was the Marcus who'd existed before the ambition and the affairs and the crimes. Or maybe this had always been who he was, and I'd just been too naive to see it. "I'll call you tomorrow," Marcus said to his mother, not looking at me. "We can talk then." Constance nodded, fumbling in her purse for her keys, the contents rattling and clinking as she dug through them. Her hands were shaking, and it took her 3 tries to pull out the keyring, a heavy thing with too many keys and a Tiffany charm that probably cost more than most people's rent. "You can stay with me," she offered. "You don't have to impose on David." "It's no imposition," David said firmly. "He's my brother. Of course he's welcome." They made their way to the front door, this strange parade of people leaving my house, leaving my life. Jonathan gathered up his papers and his coat, his work here done for the night, though I knew this was just the beginning of a longer process. There would be court dates and filings and probably more confrontations before this was all truly finished. "I'll be in touch Monday," he said to me, and his hand on my shoulder was warm and steadying. "You did well tonight, Claire. Better than most people would have in your situation. You should be proud." Proud. The word felt strange, unfamiliar. I wasn't sure I felt proud. I felt wrung out, exhausted, like I'd run a marathon through mud and barely crossed the finish line. But I also felt lighter somehow, like a weight I'd been carrying for so long had finally been lifted, leaving me free to stand up straight for the first time in months. My parents and Sarah lingered after the others had left, and I was grateful for their presence, for the way they filled the sudden silence with their breathing, their movement, their solid, dependable existence. Sarah had started collecting plates and glasses, carrying them to the kitchen with purposeful efficiency, and I could hear the sound of running water as she began to wash dishes. "Leave it," I called out. "I'll clean up tomorrow." "You sure?" she called back. But the water shut off, and she returned, drying her hands on a dish tag. "I don't mind staying. I can crash on the couch, keep you company tonight. You shouldn't be alone after everything that just happened." The offer was tempting. So tempting because the thought of being alone in this house, in this space that Marcus and I had shared for 5 years, was terrifying. But I also knew that I needed to face it, needed to start adjusting to this new reality where it was just me, where I was responsible only for myself, where I could make my own choices without having to consider anyone else. "I need to be alone," I said, and saw understanding flash in Sarah's eyes. "Not because I want to be, but because I need to learn how. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," my mother said, coming over to fold me into her arms. She barely came up to my shoulder, but her embrace was fierce and all-encompassing, and I bent down to bury my face in her hair, breathing in her familiar scent of Dove soap and the lavender sachets she kept in her closet. "But you call us if you need anything, okay? Anytime, day or night. We're 10 minutes away." "I will," I promised and meant it. I wasn't too proud to ask for help, not anymore. Pride was what had kept me silent for the first few months after discovering Marcus's affairs. Pride and shame and the mistaken belief that I could somehow fix this if I just tried hard enough. I'd learned the hard way that some things couldn't be fixed, could only be survived. My father held me next, his arms strong and safe, and I let myself be small for just a moment. Let myself be his little girl again, the one he'd carried on his shoulders and taught to ride a bike, and walked down the aisle on my wedding day, with tears streaming down his face. "I'm so sorry, baby girl," he whispered into my hair. "I'm sorry you had to go through this." "It's not your fault," I said, pulling back to look at him. "None of this is your fault. You raised me to be strong, to stand up for myself, to know my worth. You gave me everything I needed to survive this." He cupped my face in his hands, his palms rough and warm against my cheeks, and looked at me with such love and pain that it nearly broke me. "You're going to be okay," he said, and it wasn't a question. "You're going to be better than okay. You're going to thrive." I wanted to believe him, wanted to trust in that certainty. But right now, all I could see was the wreckage of my marriage scattered around this room. The half-empty champagne bottles, the dirty plates, the rumpled cushions on the couch where I'd sat while my world fell apart and then reassembled itself into something new and unfamiliar. They left eventually, after extracting one more promise that I'd call if I needed them, and then I was alone. The house settled around me with creaks and sighs, old wood contracting in the winter cold, the heating system clicking on with its familiar whoosh of warm air through the vents. I stood in the middle of the living room and turned slowly, taking in every detail, seeing it all with fresh eyes. This was my house now, mine alone. I could do whatever I wanted with it. Paint the walls that hideous color Constance had always hated. Get rid of the formal furniture and replace it with something comfortable and soft. Turn Marcus's study into a library or an art studio, or just a room where I could sit and think, without any ghosts looking over my shoulder. The possibilities felt overwhelming and exhilarating in equal measure, and I found myself walking through the rooms, touching things, claiming them silently as my own. The kitchen with its marble countertops and professional-grade appliances that I'd never learned to use properly because Marcus had preferred we eat out at restaurants where he could see and be seen. The dining room with its mahogany table that could seat 12 and had only ever been used for these obligatory family gatherings. The powder room with its pretentious wallpaper that cost $200 a roll and that I'd always thought was ugly. I climbed the stairs to the second floor, my hand trailing along the banister that was smooth from years of use. The bedroom door was open, and I could see inside to where the bed sat neatly made with its expensive Egyptian cotton sheets and down comforter. Marcus's side of the closet stood half empty now, the hangers naked and accusing, and I could see gaps where he'd grabbed shirts and pants and shoes in his hurry to pack. But I didn't go in. Not yet. Instead, I turned to the second bedroom, the one we'd always called the guest room, but that I'd secretly thought of as the future nursery. The room was painted a neutral beige, furnished with a queen bed and a dresser and nothing else. It was impersonal, bland, a space that belonged to no one and everyone. I walked to the window and looked out at the street below, watching the last of the New Year's revelers making their way home, stumbling and laughing and holding each other up. Somewhere out there, people were making resolutions, promising themselves they'd be better, healthier, happier in the year to come. Somewhere out there, people were kissing their partners and toasting to their futures and believing that this year would be different, would be special. And maybe it would be. Maybe for me too, this year would be the one where everything changed. Not because of some magical transformation at midnight, but because I'd finally found the courage to walk away from something that was killing me slowly, quietly, one disappointment at a time. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out to see a text from Sarah. "Still awake if you need me. Love you, sis." The words glowed on the screen, warm and real, and I felt tears prick at my eyes for the first time all night. I typed back quickly, my thumbs clumsy on the small keyboard. "Love you too. I'm okay. Really." Another buzz, almost immediate. "You don't have to be okay. You just have to keep breathing. Everything else can wait." She was right, of course. Sarah was always right about these things, had an emotional intelligence that I'd always envied. All I had to do was keep breathing, keep putting one foot in front of the other, keep moving forward even when I had no idea where I was going. I made my way back downstairs, suddenly desperate for something to do with my hands, some task to occupy my mind. The kitchen was a disaster, evidence of the party that had started with such hope and ended in such spectacular fashion. I started loading the dishwasher, finding comfort in the mundane task, in the clatter of plates and the steam rising from the hot water. As I worked, I let my mind wander, thinking about what came next. I'd need to update my resume, start looking for work. The museum job was long gone, but maybe I could find something similar, something that would let me spend my days surrounded by beauty and history and art. Or maybe I'd do something completely different, something I'd never considered before because Marcus had opinions about what kind of work was suitable for his wife. I could go back to school, finish that art history degree I'd abandoned when Marcus made partner. I could travel, see all the places I'd always wanted to visit, but that Marcus had dismissed as provincial or boring. I could take up painting or pottery or ballroom dancing or any of the 100 things I'd been interested in over the years, but had set aside because they didn't fit with the life Marcus wanted us to have. The freedom was dizzying, terrifying, intoxicating. I was 32 years old, and for the first time in my adult life, I got to decide what I wanted, where I went, who I spent my time with. No more considering Marcus's schedule, or his preferences, or his image. No more molding myself into the shape of the woman he wanted me to be. The dishwasher was full, and I started it, listening to the familiar whoosh and hum as it began its cycle. I wiped down the counters, put away the leftover food that would probably go bad before I could eat it all, threw away the dead flowers in the vase on the windowsill that I'd bought 4 days ago, and forgotten to water. By the time I was finished, it was nearly 3 in the morning, and exhaustion was pulling at me like a physical weight. I checked all the locks, turned off all the lights except for the one in the foyer, and slowly climbed the stairs to the bedroom. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, looking at the bed that Marcus and I had shared for 5 years, trying to decide if I could sleep there tonight or if the memories would be too much. But then I thought about what Sarah had said, about how I just had to keep breathing, and I realized that running away from my own bedroom, letting Marcus's ghost chase me out of my own space, was just another way of letting him win. So I walked in, undressed quickly without looking at myself in the mirror, and pulled on an old t-shirt that was soft from 1,000 washings. I climbed into bed and was surprised to find that it felt the same as it always had. Just a bed, just cotton, and down and springs and frame. The sheets were cool against my skin, and I pulled the comforter up to my chin, cocooning myself in warmth. I thought I'd lie awake for hours, thought I'd replay the evening's events over and over, analyzing every word and gesture and expression. But instead, I felt sleep pulling at me almost immediately, a heavy, irresistible darkness that promised oblivion and rest. My last thought before I drifted off was that I'd made it through the worst day of my life, and I'd survived. Whatever came next, whatever challenges and difficulties and moments of doubt lay ahead, I knew now that I was strong enough to face them. Marcus had called me useless, but he'd been wrong. So very, very wrong. I woke to sunlight streaming through the windows, bright and sharp and promising. For a moment, I didn't remember where I was, why I felt so heavy and strange. Then it all came rushing back. The party, the confrontation, the signed papers, and I waited for the grief to hit me, for the weight of it to press me back into the mattress. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt something else, something that took me a moment to identify because it had been so long since I'd felt it. Hope. That's what it was, tentative and fragile but undeniably there, like the first green shoots pushing through snow in early spring. I got up and padded to the window looking out at the street below. It was New Year's Day, The first day of a new year, and the world looked scrubbed clean by the night's celebrations. The confetti from last night's revelries had mostly blown away, leaving just a few colorful scraps caught in the bare branches of the trees lining the sidewalk. A jogger ran past, her breath puffing in white clouds in the cold morning air. A man walked his dog, stopping to let it sniff at a fire hydrant. A young couple stumbled out of a cab, still dressed in last night's party clothes, laughing and holding each other up as they made their way to their building. Life was going on, normal and everyday and beautiful in its mundanity. The world hadn't ended. The sun had still risen. People were still going about their business, oblivious to the personal apocalypse that had occurred in this brownstone just hours ago. I showered, standing under water hot enough to turn my skin pink, letting it wash away the residue of last night, the tension and fear and bitter triumph. I dressed in comfortable clothes, yoga pants and a worn sweatshirt, the kind of outfit Marcus had always hated, said made me look sloppy and unmotivated. In the kitchen, I made coffee, strong and black, and carried it to the living room where evidence of last night still lingered. The signed divorce papers sat on the coffee table where Jonathan had left them, and I picked them up carefully, reverently almost, and carried them to Marcus's former study. I placed them in the file cabinet where I'd been storing all the other evidence, all the receipts and bank statements and text message screenshots that had built the case against him. Then I returned to the living room and looked around at the mess, the dirty glasses and crumpled napkins and the dark stain on the rug where Constance's champagne had spilled. I could clean it up, or I could leave it, a monument to the end of one life and the beginning of another. I decided to leave it, at least for today. Today, I just wanted to exist in this strange new reality without doing anything productive or responsible. Today, I wanted to remember that I was allowed to rest, to recover, to take time to process everything that had happened. I curled up on the couch with my coffee and my phone and scrolled through the dozens of messages that had come in overnight. Sarah checking on me every hour until finally giving up and sending one last, "Good night, I love you," at 4 a.m. My parents with similar messages of love and support. Even David had texted, a simple, "Take care of yourself, Claire. You deserve better than what my brother gave you." But there was nothing from Marcus. No apology, no explanation, no final goodbye. Just silence, as complete and total as if he'd never existed at all. And maybe that was for the best. Maybe clean breaks were better than prolonged goodbyes. Maybe it was easier to move forward when there were no loose threads to tie up, no last conversations to have, no final chances to make things right. I set my phone aside and picked up the book I'd been trying to read for weeks, a novel about a woman who packed up her life and moved to Italy after her divorce. I'd started it before I'd made my own plans to leave Marcus, and at the time it had seemed like fantasy, like something that could never happen to someone like me. But now, sitting in my house that was really my house, holding divorce papers that would soon be filed with the court, it didn't seem so impossible anymore. Maybe I wouldn't move to Italy. Maybe I'd stay right here in Manhattan, build a new life in this city I'd always loved. Or maybe I'd go somewhere completely different, somewhere I'd never considered before. The point was, I could. I had that freedom now, that choice. The sun moved across the room as the morning turned to afternoon, warming the spot where I sat, and I read and dozed and thought about nothing in particular. At some point, I got hungry and made myself a sandwich from the leftover prime rib, eating it standing at the kitchen counter while looking out at the small garden behind the house where snow was just starting to fall, fat white flakes that caught the light and sparkled.